All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Salt Lake Business Podcast. I'm here with my elementary, middle school, and high school alum, Brody Leven.
So true.
Yes, so true. We go way back. So I hit him up when he's not in New Zealand, traveling the world. So I finally caught him when he's here. So this is awesome. So Brody, for the people who didn't know you when you were 5 years old, kind of give them an overview of who you are and what you're doing right now.
This is my 14th year in Salt Lake City. Moved out here to go to college at Westminster College in 2006 after graduating from West Geauga High School. But yeah, before that, Northeastern Ohio, trying to get into the ski world growing up was interesting, skiing at Alpine Valley. And I kind of made this opportunity for myself to go to a ski academy for junior and senior year of high school. If you remember, I wasn't there for the second and third quarter of junior and senior year because I was living in Vermont. I'd save up money from my DJ business all year and then go to the ski academy for junior and senior year to kind of see if I could operate in the ski world, because there wasn't one back home. And so I wanted to see what these people who grew up in the mountains, Vermont was as big of the mountains as I could possibly imagine, being back in Ohio. So I'm how good are these people? Can I compete? Can I do the competitions against them? And I kind of wanted to see that. And then the logical next step after that was to move out west.
Mm-hmm. So you moved out west after high school to come to Westminster, right?
Yeah.
And then when you were in school, were you skiing and schooling the whole time?
Yeah, I mean, Westminster is pretty cool. I was able to be a full-time student in the honors college and skiing 6 days a week. Sometimes more, sometimes a little less. But the proximity is obviously super close. From campus to skiing was less than a half hour for me to drive. And so if I had 3 hours between classes, I could go take a couple laps at the ski resorts,
Right.
And at the time I was doing freestyle skiing, which was conducive to pretty quick days. You can go get a couple laps and have a really good time. Since then, the type of skiing I do has evolved. But I was able to be full-time student body president, really involved on campus, really involved in the community, and still be kind of pursuing this ski thing for after school.
Yeah. So you've been kind of involved in that. I think were you vice president or something in elementary school or in middle
I think
school?
so,
Yeah, you've been
I was pretty involved, yeah.
So how did that come to be? Because I remember when I was in elementary school, middle school, that didn't even cross my mind to be involved in that. How are you always geared to do something like that?
Yeah, I don't know. I definitely don't come from a family that's particularly involved in those senses, and I'm not an extroverted person by any means, and so I always found leadership really interesting. Ever since middle school, I've been doing these leadership seminars and going to leadership conferences all through high school and college. And a lot of that was kind of directly tied to student government. And I had no real political aspirations in the real world, but I always found it interesting how you could have such an impact on your community, whether that's your campus or your town or whatever, without being politically involved, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And this leadership component that I was so interested, really tied into it. And then I was also really interested in entrepreneurship with this DJ business that I started when I was 9 years old. And that I'm sure you remember all through high school. And so I had this leadership and entrepreneurship component, and it all kind of tied together with the student government thing and these leadership roles. And I kind of just kept with that. I had moved out here, and Westminster had never had a student body president who wasn't from Utah. Because it's people look at you as the local expert, and they look at you to ask questions about the community and just all these things. And I'm that could never be me. And by the end of my sophomore year, I was student body president of my college.
Wow. And then were you that till you graduated?
Yeah, that's totally
awesome.
And I kept up with skiing, but skiing definitely had to be secondary for me because I had to be a full-time student and I had to focus on the campus community. But the whole time I was still skiing a lot.
Awesome. So you said you're always an entrepreneur. How did you come to create a DJ business when you were 9 years old?
Yeah. Matt Dorsky hired me for his Halloween party when we were 9 years old. I'd been really interested in hip hop as a young kid. I loved graffiti and I took breakdance lessons in Chardon when I was 10. But along with that just came this interest in turntable DJing, and I thought that was so cool. But you can't
first of all, there's not really a market for that. That's like on TV and stuff. And second of all, it's not a way that would make money unless you're like the best in the world at it.
Yeah.
And I thought I loved that, but it turned out I really just loved like entertaining people and like helping people have a good time on their own terms. And so that turned into mobile DJing, which is really the only facet of DJing that you can actually make any money at if you're an average person like myself. And
Going to parties?
totally, yeah. So that, and like it went from like me picturing like DJing like clubs or like the Beastie Boys rapping to like me DJing like weddings and corporate events and our high school prom and that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah, the middle school dances.
Totally, middle school dances.
With fire, yeah, I remember.
And so like that transition was very much like market dependent. Like the demand was there for the mobile DJ. So I went from like thinking I was going to be playing this underground hip hop to like Britney Spears. But it turned out for me that didn't really matter too much.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So when was your when did you hang them up? When did you hang up the headphones? When was your last DJ set?
I think maybe my freshman year out here, like so 2006, 2007, I think I might have come home to DJ a couple shows, but for the most part, I remember I kind of like formally liquidated my company. I sold off all of my gear except the stuff that's still in my parents' garage back home. And I was pretty much like, that was a significant phase of my life, and like it's done now.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and it's funny because I still inside identify more as a DJ than as almost any, probably more so than a skier even, because it was such like a foundational part of my life.
Yeah.
And when I go home, everyone's still like, oh, Brody, the DJ, you know?
Yeah.
But what's funny is like my friends out here, when they're like, oh, Brody, the DJ, I'm like, I hadn't done that for 10 years when I met you, but it's still like something I talk about. It's still something I think about. And like, when I think about like Brody as an entrepreneur, that's still, although I still am in a different right, that's still what comes to mind for me, you know?
Right. So at your like peak, how much were you pulling in like a month off this DJ business?
Oh man, I was pouring a lot of it back into the business. I mean,
Like a good entrepreneur.
Yeah, totally. Because like I didn't have an end goal in sight, you know. But I mean, I probably made $50,000 a year when I was 13 years old or something, you know.
Nice. And what were you like? You paying tax on that?
I don't know.
Yeah, right. Who's thinking about that at 13?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I probably like grossed that and then probably made $0 because like, you know, it's like, okay, what do you need money for as a 13-year-old? Like, you're living at home, so it's like, well, I need money for my business, not because it's my business, as much as because it's also what I like to do. It's also my hobby. So like, I wanted to buy some cool like new effects lighting. Like, yes, in theory, it's there is a return on that investment, but I also just like, that's what I liked.
You wanted it, yeah.
Totally, I wanted it, you know? So it's like, it was professional and personal all tied together. And fast forward 20 years to now, and that personal, professional is still very much intricately tied together.
Right. So you go to college, you're majoring in what, econ?
Econ and like liberal arts, yeah.
Okay. So you graduate with these 2 degrees, and then what happens? You get hired at some accounting firm, or you put the degree to hard use?
I had some job offers that I literally didn't even consider because I was like, college was an end in itself for me. It wasn't a means to an end. It wasn't like, get this piece of paper and now I have this skill set or this trade and I'm going to go be an economist. It was like, I'm here to experience the college experience, you know?
Yeah.
And so then all of a sudden, 6 months after graduation, I get my first student loan bill. And I was like, oh, I thought that was like Monopoly money, you know? And I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? And I'd worked through college as student body president. I got a small stipend and as a rock climbing guide because I picked up rock climbing when I moved out here. And I was like, oh, how am I going to do this? You know, I'd saved a little bit of money in college, but like I was paying for college on my own. And this is like small liberal arts private school in Utah, you know, like how am I going to do this? And so I decided to kind of put all my eggs into this one idea of becoming a pro skier, which I'd wanted to do since I was like 7 years old. And I went to, I just kind of started hustling in the ski world. I had sponsors that had provided me gear for freestyle skiing like my whole life, or I mean, since whatever, high school. And it's pretty easy to get free gear if you have some talent. It's really hard to take the step from free gear to getting like a travel budget to go like compete and go on trips and stuff, and then to getting an actual salary. And largely because there's always someone else who's, you know, who has some silver spoon of some variety and is able to do the same thing you would do, except they don't need to get paid for it. And so convincing these brands that like, hey, like not only should you give me a free pair of skis and a pair of goggles, but you should also like help me pay my rent. That was a challenge.
Yeah. So who was your first deal with?
Well, I mean, I kind of rolled in some of my freestyle skiing deals. So that was like Line skis I'd been sponsored for like 10 years, but they didn't make the type of skis that I was using because at this point I had combined my backcountry skiing, which was like a newfound thing for me, and my and my newfound rock climbing ability to ski mountaineering, which is climbing mountains with like a variety of skills and equipment, and then skiing down them all under your own power. So no chairlifts, helicopters, snowmobiles, nothing like that. And so it's this certain type of skiing, all human powered. You need really lightweight gear because you're carrying it all up with you. My old ski sponsor wasn't doing it. Got a sponsor, this company called Surface Skis that was based out of Salt Lake. They made a really lightweight ski at the time. They were like a really cool, edgy company because they also made park skis for like that type of community, and kind of like bridged the gap that I was also bridging between this freestyle world and this backcountry world. And that was really cool for me. And then, you know, I'd go on a trip and I'd contact another company. I'd be like, hey, I need a little bit of gear. And then that trip would go really well. And I'd be like, hey, like maybe we can turn this into something else in the future, you know? And simultaneously, social media was starting to take off. Say this is 2011-ish. I was sitting in Tony Stricker's basement in 2010, I think. And
Shout out Tony Stricker.
Right? He convinced me to get a Twitter. He's like, maybe this will help in your like ski aspirations, you know? And I pretty much took my savings, put it all into one trip to South America. And I was like, if I come back and I can make money off this, I'm good. If I come back and I can't, I'm going to have to like get a job. But I had never had a job. I'd never had a boss. And I had no desire to.
Yeah.
And I still don't.
So tell me about that. So you go to South America, and then what happens? You just went by yourself?
Yeah, I mean, at the time I was living, well, like as soon as I graduated, I rode my bike across the US. I was like doing these things that I could scrape by with almost no money. You know, I was living in a crawl space in a friend's house, like an unfinished crawl space, like the walls were the dirt foundation of the house.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
I couldn't even stand up in it. It was just like rafter ceiling joists, you know. It was like pretty much unlivable. And like that's where I was living because I was willing to sacrifice almost anything. Not for this lifestyle, because that lifestyle was not what I aspired to, but for what I hoped this lifestyle could lead to, which was actually, you know, so I had like an end picture in mind of like what being a professional skier could look like. But I knew it was going to look a little different for me because I'm not Julian Carr, like you interviewed. I'm not the best skier, and I don't have this extreme skill set like he has. Instead, I was going to have to be this other kind of like well-rounded, relatable, everyday person who for some reason has influence over other people and has a slightly above par skill set. And so like it was going to be this interesting thing, which has turned into being kind of a new model for professional skiing. But some people and some brands and some fans still can't grasp the fact that you can do something for a living without being the best in the world.
Right. So cool. So you basically kind of hacked. So was Twitter your gateway, and then Instagram came on? I know you had a blog as well and a website.
Yeah, nice memory. Yeah.
So,
I mean, I graduated college without ever having had a Facebook, which this isn't like light years ago. Like everyone had Facebook when we were in college, you know, and I didn't. And I had no interest in social media, and I very much got into it for professional reasons. I'm like, I kind of saw this glimmer of like, this could help me professionally. And so I got Twitter, I think, you know, a year or two later, I got a Facebook, got an Instagram eventually. And, but all the while, when I'd finished that bike ride across the country in 2010, I'd kept a journal every day. And I finished the bike ride really early. I was home in Chesterland with nothing to do. So I went back and I started BrodyLeven.com and stared blogging like after the fact. So I started on day one and then day two, whatever I'd written in my journal word for word. And I emailed it to everyone I knew because I didn't have any other way to get it out there. And it was getting a lot of views. Like, it was getting a lot of views, and people loved to follow along on this bike ride. And then the bike ride ended, right? It was like 40-something days.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, what do I write today? I have all these people that are reading this. You know, thousands of people are reading this blog. And blogging was really big at the time. And so I started writing stuff. I just write like what I did today. Like I went and skied some mountain, or like I went and did this rock climb, you know, and I wrote in such a way that was pretty relatable and funny. And I just kept that going because people loved the blog thing, and people don't anymore. But social media has largely replaced that, and so it's pretty much just my blog now, and it's not like an ego thing for me. I don't enjoy doing it. I would not be doing it if it wasn't professional reasons, but it's still sincere, and it's still something I like put a lot into.
Right, it's like your truth, and then you can look back on it. Yeah,
totally. Yeah,
that's awesome. So that was what, 2012?
Yeah, kind of all runs together.
Plus minus.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So when would you say you kind of like you took off? You're like, okay, like money was coming in from sponsors, you had a following, and then you're like, oh, I might actually like be out of sleeping by the rafters from now on.
Sure, that's a really interesting question, because I don't even know how to put my finger on that, but there was very much a time when it was like, okay, I'm not just getting free gear, I'm getting a little travel budget, and then all of a sudden it was like, bam, oh, maybe like I landed Salomon as a sponsor. I was their first ever 4-season athlete, global athlete, like on the Salomon team for running, skiing, climbing, bike, everything. And I got signed as that, and it was like real money. And I acted as if I was used to that, and I was like, yeah, maybe a little more than that. I was like negotiating, and I'm like, oh my God, this is for skiing? Seriously? And since then, the bar was set high for me, which was really good, because some people's first sponsor is just, we'll give you a little bit of money, a little bit of whatever, a little bit of support. And my bar was set really high from the beginning, which was really beneficial for me, because I learned my worth right away.
Right.
And they helped me create that worth as well, because they have such a large platform.
So how did you get to such a big company like Salomon? Did you reach out to them, or did they approach you?
Yeah, I had gotten to them through a watch company that I was working at the time, who's owned by the same company. And so like the people kind of work in the same building, and someone from the watch company who was not paying me, or maybe wasn't paying me very much, they're like, hey, like, would you be interested in the ski company as well? Because I sit next to the ski team manager or whatever, and kind of one thing led into another. And I was very much, this was my entire world at the time, because I'm like, I have to make a living doing this.
Yeah.
Like I don't have a plan B. I don't have rich parents. I don't have like an uncle that lives in Salt Lake that I can like go live in his basement while I'm trying to make it work.
Right.
It's like, I have to be able to pay my $300 a month rent, and there are no options. I have to be able to pay my health insurance, And so it's like all cards on the table, like doing everything. I would go to the Outdoor Retailer trade show and the SIA trade show, which is the ski one.
In Denver, right?
Yep.
Outdoor Retailer?
Outdoor Retailer was in Salt Lake.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, or it was in Salt Lake until 2 years ago. I would go to Outdoor Retailer twice a year. I would go to SIA, which was in Denver at the time, and I would hustle. Like I would come with these portfolios that these brands had never seen an athlete present a portfolio. I'd have these like interactive presentations on my iPad to show them. I would have this whole monetization schedule of like, hey, this is how I'm not famous. This is not famous, but what I do could potentially be famous. But let's say you don't pay me unless it gets known. So like, how about you pay me you can pay me whatever you feel comfortable with for every 1,000 YouTube views I get. If that's what you value, maybe you like Twitter. How about every time I mention you on Twitter, you pay me whatever you're comfortable with? And so this way I put the power in the company's hands 100%, and they could say, well, we really value, YouTube videos. And so if you make those for us, we'll set some money aside, and if they do well, you'll be rewarded for them. It's like an entire 100% incentivization process.
Right. It's like the sales, low commitment from them, right? If you don't produce,
totally,
it's not costing them anything.
And so that was how I made it work as a non-famous skier to make a living skiing, because it's like commission pretty much.
Right, and it's like low risk, right, on their end. Yeah.
But what I learned eventually is that they still had to, the people working the budgets, the team manager, whatever, still had to earmark this money in their budget. Like we would usually put a maximum, like, okay, what if one of his videos goes viral and it gets 100 million views? Like, oh my gosh, what if that costs us $1 million?
Yeah.
And so then they had to put this money aside anyway. So eventually, as I feel like I kind of had proven myself, I could say, hey, listen, guys, I know you're like setting that maximum amount aside. We've been working together for 2 years. Why don't we put a contract together saying I need to do these things, and you can just pay me that amount? And that actually worked.
Nice.
Like they were able, like, yeah, like you're right. Like we already set it aside. If we don't use it, that's fine. But if we do use it, we can't be surprised. And so yeah, we'll just pay it. And if you don't do your job, you won't get paid, just like anyone else,
Mm-hmm.
And that was, some companies were really receptive to that, the more forward-thinking companies, because this was like 2013 or something. this has become the norm now, but at the time that was like mind blowing. And so the companies that were really forward thinking were like, wow, this is really cool. Some companies just had people that were not willing to like do things a little differently, and they're like, we've never heard this. We just usually pay athletes, and you're not famous, so like, no thank you.
Right.
And so I ended up with some really interesting sponsors, like companies you've never heard of. Like I would just go to the trade show and pretty much like do the equivalent of cold calling to every single brand. Be like, hi, you make some weird socks? Cool, I'm Brody. Can we talk for 20 minutes? You know,
and $100 here. You know, got a jean company. And by the time it's like a couple $1,000 a month.
Totally, man. And I was, you know, I had a hat company, and I had a long johns company, and like all these things did add up to enough to like make a living at the point, or at the time, and like making a living. The definition has changed over time, of course, you know. But at the point, I'm like, I could pay my bills. I could keep doing what I wanted to do. I could go on trips. And creating content, as they call it now, was like something I was happy to do. That was like my job. You know, I'm like, I have to tweet for these people or whatever. I can do that if they're going to pay me to ski.
Yeah. So when you were working for Solomon, you went on some like pretty crazy trips, like the solar eclipse and freaking, what is it, Svalbard?
Svalbard, yeah.
Yeah.
That's that shot right there. Yeah, that was Powder Magazine Photo of the Year.
That's sick.
That was really cold trip that I ended with 10 frostbitten fingers and 10 frostbitten toes that are still like destroying my life to this day.
No way.
In 2014 or something. That was a tough trip. Yeah, very cold.
I remember watching the documentary, and like the first part, it was like the ice was kind of melting, and you're like, oh, we can tell global warming. It's so warm, and then like halfway through, you're like, this sucks.
It was so cold there, man. But like, I've been fortunate enough now to like make all these trips work all over the world, and you know, it's often people will ask, hey, you know, how did the brands come to you to put these trips together? Like, how do they happen? And it's like, after doing 20 big trips all over the world, there is still no recipe. It's like every trip, like I want to go to this weird peninsula elsewhere in the world this year, and I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to get it paid for. You have to get it paid for. I mean, it's my job, so I need to get paid to do it. Plus, I need to have the trip paid for. And like, how am I going to do that? And it's just like, oh, I'll think about that later. You know?
So how do those trips come to be? So like, let's take this one for instance, the solar eclipse one. Does like Solomon approach you, or does kind of like the athletes you went with kind of just ideate with them and say, hey, this would be a good idea, and then you pitch the companies?
Yeah, this was a little bit different because they do like a series of trips every year that they make a film series about. And this was going to be in this one Banff Mountain Film Festival. This was like a big thing that I was the only ski mountaineer on the team that was interested in going on this. And so they're like, all right, you're on the trip. I was like the new athlete. Most trips, I come up with the idea. I'm like sitting on Google Earth, because I think for a lot of athletes, the brands come to them with the trips. But for me, my trips are so obscure that like one reason I can do what I do is because I can come up with these trips. Someone sitting in an office, like doing whatever their job is probably not going to be able to come up with these trips because I spend all day thinking about these trips.
Right. And ski in Africa.
Totally, exactly. And so I come up with these ideas, and then I have to find partners. I have to find filmers, photographers, funding, all the logistics, and that's a huge part of my job, actually.
So is it easier to get funding because you like come up with this badass plan and you're basically doing all the work and it's like, hey, I just need you to cut me a check?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it just never seems to be the same.
Really?
Like, I know how last year's trip got paid for. I have no idea how this year's trip will get paid for. It's like different every single time. Like sometimes one of my sponsors will say have a new product that's just being launched at the right time where they have some marketing budget for it. And they're like, oh, if you take this new product with you to Africa to go skiing and take some pictures of it there and gather some content for us there, we can cover the cost of your trip. You know, and I no longer need to be like, well, you need to pay me on top of that because I'm already getting paid salary from these companies, you know?
Right.
And I just consider that part of the job. No one's telling me I need to go on 1 or 2 giant trips a year and leave my house for months at a time, you know? But that's what I love to do. I mean, that's why I got into it originally. Like, that's still like what I love to do. I spend most of my year training for like 1 or 2 big expeditions, like somewhere weird.
So
Really
did you went to New Zealand earlier. Mm-hmm. Was that kind of just like a fun trip? Would you count that as a big one?
Yeah, I would count it as a big trip because it was extremely expensive. But right now, I don't have like this honeypot sponsor that is willing to be like, oh, you want to go to New Zealand? That's one of the most expensive places in the world. We'll cover that for you, you know?
Yeah.
that was actually, I had a friend getting married there, a college friend, and I'm like, well, I've never been to New Zealand. Maybe I could take this 2-day wedding and turn it into like a 6-week trip. And that's what I did.
Nice.
So I went skiing for like 3 weeks, in which I skied 1 day because the weather was so bad. And then I went to Tasmania and went rock climbing. Then I went to the wedding in Australia, and then my girlfriend came, met me for that wedding, and then we went back to New Zealand. And so it was a long trip.
Yeah.
And that was like, out of my pocket, just a fun trip. Because before I was getting paid to do these trips, I was just taking my meager savings and like going because I wanted to travel, because I hadn't seen the world, because I'd been in Ohio and that's it, and give me like 13 years out of Ohio, and I've been to every continent except Antarctica, and I've skied all over the world, and I've like seen all these really cool cultures, and I've been able to experience a lot of stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I've been following you for years, so it's always been sweet. So what's cooking this year? What's 2020 hold for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe it's because the funding's always such a crux of this whole thing that it's like I hate to even think of it in advance. In reality, I probably should be thinking of it in advance because I'm like a planner. You'd think I'd know where my ski season's kind of like May, June, and so you'd think I'd know where I'm going, and I have a couple ideas in mind, but like beyond knowing that there are mountains in this part of the world or that part of the world, I've planned nothing.
Oh, really?
What I have been working on is I went to the country of Georgia like in 2018 to climb and ski a mountain that had never been climbed or skied before. And I was successful on that trip insofar as I climbed it and skied it. But there was
Is that the one you were like held up with gunpoint or something with the rebels?
No, that was that's happened a couple times actually. So, yeah, this trip was peaceful, but I've been working on a film for that for like the past 20 months, and I should finish editing it tomorrow, hopefully at my buddy's studio who I'm working with, and that has been just like a lot of weight on my shoulders. It's like a pretty heavy film for me. It's about like a lot of professional changes, a lot of life changes, all kind of wrapped around in a ski story. But there's like, it's a 15-minute film and there's like 10 seconds of skiing. It's not about the skiing,
Right.
And so once that gets put out to the world, I'll submit it to all the film festivals. I have to try to sell that to get some funding for it because I've been paying for that out of pocket. And all these things are fun to do as passion projects out of pocket, but like you can't do that forever,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, once that's out there, that'll be really nice. And I'm building a Sprinter van. I'm having a Sprinter van built out.
I saw that.
And so that's been like a lot of, that's like a personal thing. But again, personal and professional is so tied together. Like Katie and I will travel all over in the Sprinter van, but we will be doing work while we're doing that,
Yeah.
And so...
you got like a satellite receiver to get internet in those leak locations?
We'll get internet when we get back, I guess.
Okay.
But like we'll be using it for both. So like I take a big part of my like work day to do that. Like this morning I worked on ordering some stuff for the van. Then I went ice climbing. Now I'm doing this, and I'll probably go to the gym tonight. And
Nice.
like, that'll be my day of like work. Any of those things make me money? No. Do they all cost me money? Yes. But except this. But like that is just the nature of the business. There's a lot of uncertainty in it for sure.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of how I feel like mine is too. How I set up my business is I love real estate, so I set up my business around that. And the podcast here is just kind of like a creative release. So like the podcast cost me like a bunch of money, equipment. I got a freaking videographer and everything.
Right.
But I don't know. It's fun. So I definitely relate with what you got going on.
Yeah, and I think some people look at that with just like hearts around their eyes to think about turning what you love into your work, but like there's definitely a downside to that. When people are like, hey, what do you recommend, like how to be a pro skier and ski every day? I'm like, what you should do is get a job and then go buy your own ski gear. And it works way easier that way because there's the separation between work and what you like to do then. And like you will hold skiing in such a higher regard. Like I'm so close to getting burned out on skiing all the time, which is what I love more than anything. Mm-hmm. But it's like I feel like I could just go forever without skiing and be okay because it's been so much of my life,
Yeah.
And if I was able to separate that a little bit more, I think that would not be the case. So instead, it's turned to me, and maybe this is your relationship with the real estate too. It's like having to kind of reinvent what I like about it and what I do with it. Like for me, it's become so much more about the traveling and the messages that I can convey through the travel than it is about literally the act of having skis on my feet and going through snow. That's not novel for me anymore,
Right.
But the places I get to go, the people I get to meet, the things I get to do, talking about the things that I care about, like, environmental issues, these things are what matter to me more now. but it's still all framed by skiing, you know?
Yeah, so that's what I noticed on Instagram. Instagram's kind of like your blog now. It's like you definitely you have to hit see more on every single post, and it's just like
Totally.
yeah, like 5 paragraphs, which I enjoy reading. But a lot of them, you've been on Capitol Hill like every other month. It seems like what do you got going on up there?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go up there when I think or a lot of times these I volunteer with a number of organizations that will like call upon me during relevant times, you know. So like I'll go to DC. I used to go to DC every year. I haven't gone for maybe a year and a half now, but yeah, I'll go there because there's a climate change bill that's being presented or something like that, you know, and they can use people of a certain stature to talk about these issues who have a certain experience, you know, firsthand experience with climate change, because I go to these glaciers that are completely disappearing all over the world, you know. I did a video with Google last year that was like kind of relating the challenges with talking about and addressing climate change to the challenges of like climbing and skiing mountains, like going to one hill and going to the other hill. It was called Hill to Hill, and Capitol Hill to the Mountains Hill, and that was like something that had so much more meaning to me than just skiing, because just skiing is just skiing.
Yeah.
And like I wouldn't want to make a living just skiing, just being someone who skis every single day just to be the best skier. Like you're using your body but not your mind, you know. I've really liked the opportunity to be more than just like a corpse throwing myself off of cliffs or like doing whatever, and instead becoming someone who's able to use my mind to do my job. And that's why I still see what I do as so entrepreneurial, because I still don't have a boss. I still don't have this or that, you know, like I'm still having to figure out how to make a living, and it's like constant reinvention.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So I remember you used to work for Solomon, and then there's this long ass post on a hard break of it, kind of sounded like.
Yeah.
So like what happened there, and then how did you kind of, I guess, recover? I don't know if it's the right word, but move on from that?
Yeah, I mean, the film is actually kind of about that in some ways. This film that I'm just finishing, it's nothing happened. All of a sudden I got an email saying I was off the team out of nowhere, mid-contract, after working with them for like 4 years. And I never, there's nothing else to say about it. I never learned anything else about it.
Oh, really? And no call or anything?
No. And I think frequently people have a hard time with the fact that when you think about work, you think about something you don't enjoy generally. And it's hard for a lot of, especially America, to see work as anything other than you punch in, you punch out, you didn't like it, and then you get to go live your life. I've found work to be fun. It can be something that's enjoyable. You can do something you actually want to be doing. Like, this is a job. It just happens to be awesome. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean I still don't have the same bills to pay. I still don't have the same responsibilities as anyone else. So I'm just guessing. But like, if someone can be like, hey, we need to save some money on our budget, like, oh, these guys just get paid to ski, like whatever.
Yeah.
There's the zeros we need back on our budget, you know?
Yeah, it's a line item on their P&L.
Totally. That's how you end up feeling, which is kind of like going from this entrepreneurial mindset to like, oh my God, I feel like I'm just like, yeah, a line item. You know, I thought I was my own boss, and all of a sudden I'm just being crossed off with a red pen.
Yeah.
Know? And so that's been something that's pretty hard to swallow, which is why I think I've had to reinvent myself, like stay dynamic in the way that I make money, definitely diversify insofar as the act of skiing, sliding down snow is not the only way I make money anymore, which is, I'm really happy with that. You know, it allows me to use my brain more. You know, I have a rental property. I have a lot of the way I make money is framed by skiing still. It's based on this reputation I have as a skier, my experience as a skier, but it's not always, we are going to pay you to be a skier. You know, it's like, hey, come be in this commercial. We know about you because you're a skier. You're not gonna be skiing in the commercial, but like a car company hired me for a series of commercials last year. That was like, that's great. I got it because of skiing. There was no skiing involved.
Yeah.
And so like, I still consider that being part of being a professional skier without actually having to do the skiing. And I love that, you know, it's like that diversification I think is good for the wallet, good for sanity, and just like good professional decision, I think, like in any portfolio in life.
Exactly,
you know?
right? You don't have all your eggs in the same basket.
Totally.
So awesome. So if there's somebody kind of like in your boat who's trying to get sponsors or make a living, or maybe they are kind of like an athlete, but they're in the like, like $500 club, just like, what advice would you get them to maybe get that big contract, or maybe to kind of spread yourself out and get your name out there so you can make a living off of it?
I grew up racing little sailboats at Berlin Yacht Club. It was like an hour and a half south of us back home.
Yeah.
And this little reservoir. And I grew up racing these little sailboats because my dad and my uncle had raced sailboats like before I was born, and they still do to this day. Yacht Club is very generous. There's no yachts going on at all.
Right.
And one piece of advice they gave me about racing sailboats, was that like, if people are going faster than you, you can kind of like look into their boat and see how they're adjusting their sail, how they're sitting, what they're doing with their weight, how they're steering. And you can look at that and you can do the exact same thing they're doing. And if you do it exactly as well as you're doing it, the best you can hope for is like maintaining that distance behind them. And so my dad and my uncle were pretty terrible sailors, and they still are to this day. But they race so much, and they'll frequently be in dead last, and they're way back there, and they're watching the whole fleet of boats way ahead of them, and they do something completely different because they don't let their ego get in their way. They're like, what can happen? They're like, everyone's going this way. What if we go this way? Because we're trying to get here. And the way sailing works, you have to do this to get there. So like everyone's going this way expecting to do this because maybe they see more wind over here or something. But what if we just do this? And the worst thing that can happen is we stay in last place. The best thing that can happen is that we just made the best decision and we just caught everyone,
Yeah.
And like, they're not good at sailing, but I always kept that in mind with sailing. Because I would be in last place and I'm like, what do I have to lose? I'm just going to try something different that no one else is doing, because I don't want to just keep up with that status quo. I don't want to just keep that same distance in last place. Mm-hmm. I want to like try to win. And so I think I've translated that professionally to being, if I look at what my favorite pro skiers, my favorite climbers, my favorite writers, my favorite content creators are doing, and just try to mimic that, that's not going to get me anywhere, right? If you're flipping a house and you just want to flip it the exact same way the house was next to it flipped, it's not going to sell for any more than that first house flipped up, I assume. And so like I just try to kind of come from left field. When I approach those brands, when I was hustling super hard to try to be like, hey, here's a new way that I'm proposing to be a professional skier, and they had never heard of it before, the worst thing you could say is no, in which case I wasn't a professional skier and I still wasn't going to be. But it turns out some of them said yes. It turns out like going that opposite way on the race course actually put me ahead. And I think I likely am able to work hard enough to make a better living than a lot of other skiers. And I think it's because I've taken such a different approach to it. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to diversify what I'm doing. I'm happy to try to stay dynamic and not just like keep up with the times. And I don't mean I'm at the forefront. I'm not setting trends, but I'm doing my own thing. And I think that's resulted in a lot of like haters, a lot of trolls, a lot of people like talking behind my back, being like, Brody's not even that good at skiing. How is he making a living doing this? And I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Like I used to like get so hurt by it, and now I just kind of brush it off because I'm like, I don't need to justify that to them. I don't have to answer to them. As long as I'm able to keep doing it, I'm happy. And I think the day that I am no longer able to do it, I have no one to blame but myself.
Sure.
I think.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's super good tips. So as we're wrapping this up, what do you have, what's on the horizon for you? I know you said you don't have any trips planned, but kind of like big term thinking, like what do you got going on in the future?
Yeah, I mean, the type of skiing I do is more endurance based than it is like, I don't think Julian Carr is going to be able to jump off giant cliffs in 20 years. I could probably, because it's just simply because his body.
He says it doesn't hurt.
I know, isn't that weird? Maybe he's a bad example. He's a freak. But I think a lot of the pro skiers, the type of skiing they do is so demanding on their body. I think Julian's an exception. You're right. It's so demanding on their body. The type of skiing I do is not. It's not like destroying my knees. It's like really endurance focused. And I have such an interest in staying fit that as long as I can continue to do that, I should be able to keep doing the same type of skiing I'm doing. The catch is that just because I can do that type of skiing doesn't mean I can make a living doing that type of skiing. And so having all my eggs in this outdoor sports world, I am constantly trying to think, how do I need to reinvent myself? how can I go the opposite direction? I see people that are doing way better than I am, way more successful than I am. I'm like, do I just want to do what they're doing? Maybe they started a YouTube channel. Like, do I just want to do that because they're doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I just like, what are they not doing? Let's go find out over there.
Yeah.
And so I think that mentality will not change, and I'm just going to probably end up continuing to do things a little differently. And
well, don't start a podcast because everyone's doing it.
I think working really hard though always works in our benefit. You know, like
Absolutely.
you want to start a podcast, you start the best one. That's great.
Yeah.
You know, just don't call it cereal or whatever. You know, like
right.
Yeah.
So like business podcast, super to the point.
Totally.
Everyone knows what you're talking about.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, awesome. I really appreciate you doing this. It was good to catch up as well.
Yeah, no problem.
If the people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way?
Oh, it's Brody Leven everywhere. Everything / Brody Leven, BrodyLeven.com.
And you're mainly on what? Instagram's probably your best.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Are you Twittering still?
Yeah, Twitter, Facebook, and the website. Yeah.
Okay, I gotta follow you on Twitter. I haven't seen you there.
Ski stuff, you know.
Also, if you have a message to the people, what any final last words of wisdom?
Oh man, I think the odds were pretty stacked against me. Not in all ways. I had some privilege coming into this, but the odds were pretty stacked against me to be able to do what I wanted to do for a living, specifically because it was skiing and I was from northeastern Ohio. Not because, you know, it could have been something else and that could have worked in my favor. If I wanted to be a bar mitzvah DJ, I probably could have crushed, you know, but I wanted to be a skier. It's like, you know, you want to be a surfer and you're from Iowa, right? And so I think even with the odds stacked against me, hard work is the only thing that really worked in my favor. And when I see the odds stacked against me, I kind of see it as a challenge. And I think facing things that are going to be tough for us is really good for us. Mm-hmm. And I continue that, you know, like this thing I'm thinking about skiing tomorrow, no part of me really wants to do it. It's going to be really hard, but like, I just know it's going to be good for me. And I just kind of stick with that mentality.
Awesome, man. Well, once again, I really appreciate you doing this.
Sure.
And then I'll definitely have you on again sometime when you find your next pivot.
Heck yeah, man.
Awesome, man. Appreciate it.
No worries.
All right. Later, guys. Check it out.
Peace.